Regular listeners of this program know that you have spent a significant amount of time over the past 4 or 5 years, professionally speaking, working on advocating for some form of gun control, over the years that you have been coming onto this program, it seems like we can't go more than 4 or 5 weeks without talking about the latest massacre. And
No, we can't. In fact, you and I were on. I mean, I brought this up before, so this is nothing new. But you and I were on air while Newtown happened.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember that, when we just were getting the early reports. And it's funny. I just had the same conversation because I go on these talks once every sort of, I don't know, probably about 6 weeks to 8 weeks on Virtually Speaking, which you may be familiar with.
Yes.
And with Jay Aykroyd, and I'm going on Sunday night, with David Waldman, a.k.a. Cagro X of Daily Kos and other various media properties. And we had this whole plan to talk about a whole bunch of things. And, he does a whole series he's been doing it since Newtown, on
Yes.
accidental shootings, which was covered eventually by the New York Times and the New Yorker and other stuff, where he just keeps track of that information. And so he was like, all right, I guess our plans are thrown to the wind once again, and that's exactly what it is. You literally can't go. I mean, this is ludicrous. How anybody can be. I mean, if getting beyond the compassion for poor people who are, not poor people who are stuck in this situation, who are victims of random acts of violence. I mean, what more do you need? Charleston, Chattanooga, this. I can think of a half dozen others we're not talking about. Most people probably never heard of, because they're not infamous, because only 2 or 3 people were shot. And
Right.
That's not a mass killing. It has to be at least 4. You know what I mean? Like, we don't even hear about it. And if it doesn't happen in some sort of a venue where it's happened before, so there's more coverage. This reminds people of Aurora, so there's more coverage.
Right.
The military base attack reminded people of Fort Hood, so there's more coverage. And obviously that's a national security thing. But plenty of things. If it just happens in somebody's house in a neighborhood somewhere where an angry, father shows up and shoots his whole family and kills them, we never hear about it. That just happened in Columbus, Ohio, like about a month ago. I'm trying to remember exactly when it was. Some father killed like 3 or 4 members of his family. I mean, these things this is ridiculous, and that's the thing that's so this is not a mystery. Every other democracy, modern democracy, has figured this out, because there's nothing to figure out. It literally is just people who have science and information and data arguing against crazy people. People who, if you applied them to any other dangerous product in this country, if you applied them to airplanes, there'd be no FAA. That wouldn't be allowed. People
Right.
would be able to drink and just, and take off from the airport. Nobody would care. That would be acceptable. You know what I mean? Forget your seat being a flotation device. Your seat might actually eat you.
Right.
I mean, that's the way we treat this one issue, different than everything else. And it's so stupid and it's so ridiculous. And I happen, I've studied abroad a couple of times, so I have friends from other countries, and I just have to keep answering these questions like, what the F is wrong with you people? When will you do something? It's obvious. Everyone's done it. Who's had this problem? Australia. We've been through this before. Port Arthur massacre. They're having one massacre a year before that.
Right.
Strict gun control laws passed in the wake of the Port Arthur massacre. Have not had one since. Their suicide rate and accidental shooting rate and the homicide rates have all gone down respectively by somewhere in the 60, 70, 80% range. With guns, this is like, this is just common sense. And I mean, it's almost like, look, I get to just, after a while, I just get so frustrated with this. It doesn't mean that we're not making a ton of progress. I always have to make sure that I say that to people, that as bad as it is, it could be actually a lot worse. I mean, if we have the NRA's world, if we have the Tea Party's world, and we'll get to that, by the way, the shooter was a member of the Tea Party. What a shock, because, they're not racist. They're just like honest Americans fighting for like freedom and stuff. If we lived in their world, take all the numbers we have right now, take all the mass shootings, you probably could multiply that out a number of times. It would be that much worse, because of the over 2 million people that have been stopped who shouldn't have been buying guns by the Brady Law, and many other ways that we've stopped people. but we're riddled with loopholes. We don't try to stop people. We allow the NRA all too often still in the states and too much federally to dictate the agenda. So it's like we make improvements, but it's little by little. We pass we pass strong bills in Oregon and Washington and Delaware and a couple other states, but in the meantime, so many other states aren't passing these things. So many other states aren't fixing those loopholes, and the rest of us suffer because as the idiots who try to attack me on Twitter last night were like, "See, it doesn't work. Gun control doesn't work," except for in like every other country, of course, and the fact that in Hawaii, which has that weird thing where you can't drive there on a road and smuggle guns in there.
I'll tell you what really strikes me is that there has been multiple interviews now I've seen. I think the last one just came out today on the BBC with Obama, where he has basically reiterated that his inability to get Congress to do anything about guns has been one of his biggest frustrations, and I take that at face value. It is such a strange dynamic, and I know that there's a fairly straightforward answer as to why this happens, but I don't know of any other issue where when I'm out and about with civilians, as it were, outside of my sort of little hermetically sealed political bubble, where people react more viscerally than to stuff like this. And it seemingly would be the easiest issue to deal with because there seems to be such near uniform. I mean, obviously,
there's unanimity on, closing the terror gap, which is what allows people who are on terrorist watch lists and can't get on airplanes to still buy guns. Passing universal background checks, so everyone has to go through a background check before they get a gun, and changing the definition of domestic violence to include certain groups not included currently, which a lot of people don't know, including stalkers. Yes, that's true. You can stalk somebody, have a restraining order against you, still get a gun. Things like that, misdemeanor domestic violence, still get a gun. Those things, the three things I just mentioned, all in every state, everywhere, have north of 80% support. And they have north of like 70% support among gun owners. And so the fact that you can't start off just passing those three things, then the fact that another measure that would take care of some of these things, and the fact that I'm going to say this because I think most people will say, what? We don't have that, which is making people who report lost or stolen guns. That's right. You don't have to do that now in many states. That's a state-by-state thing. I mean, this is just ridiculous. Making dealers, very small percentage of dealers account for almost the vast majority of guns that get into criminals' hands. They're running criminal enterprises. We could use RICO laws against them, I'm sure. We could certainly have the ATF and the FBI and others go in and monitor the backdoor sales that are going out where these guys are marking up the price and selling things out the back door. But we have all these restrictions that the NRA got passed a number of years ago and keep getting passed through again through amendments that won't allow the ATF to do their job. I mean, they didn't have somebody running the ATF for 7 years because the NRA wouldn't allow anybody to do it. Finally, we beat them on that vote in the Senate. We beat them on a vote to have somebody run the frickin' organization that tracks this stuff.
Right.
So, I mean, imagine, like, if, when you think about all the things that you or I would get in trouble with if we did to our kids, like, I think if I slapped my kid across the face in public, something that I have no intention of doing, by the way, but if I did, I would be put in prison. I think if I handed my child a gun in public, in a place that allows public open carry, I would not be. I mean, it's the stupidest thing in the world. If I handed my kid a gun in public and they shot themselves, it'd be like, well, they're going through enough already. It's a difficult time for those parents. We definitely shouldn't prosecute. I mean, that's what you get. It's this deference to this industry and this culture that it's not, there's sort of, and that was, when I had those critiques in the past of Bernie Sanders. I'm not trying to get into the whole thing with Bernie again. I'm just saying there's rural culture, which exists, by the way, in other countries where people own rifles and shotguns and hunt, that nobody is interested in messing with. I couldn't care less. I used to sport shoot. I've got the little medals here. I was on a team. I enjoyed it, which is safe, and people people take precautions. And I remember a kid on our rifle range one year turned around when he was up on the range with an empty rifle in his hand. It wasn't loaded. He was thrown off the range and off the team for the entire summer. Where people don't mess around with those kinds of things. Well, that's not what we're talking about
Right.
here. We're talking about a sick, anti-government, white supremacy fueled, because this guy was a white supremacist, just like the guy in Charleston. Situation where guns are literally almost like an appendage for people. It is part of their very definition of who they are. They buy guns just because the liberals hate them, and it shows they're a tough, manly man. And some of these guys, shockingly, have mental issues or are just racists or are terrible people. And this happens. This guy had a previous criminal record. I don't know all the details yet. I know he had a previous criminal record. I know he had a Tea Party page. I know he was looking for white nationalist groups to join. The very definition of probably the vast majority of these guys, exactly what that report that was released by the Department of Homeland Security was talking about under Janet Napolitano, that then all the right-wingers freaked out, cried, and got into the fetal position and said, Obama's coming to hurt me, and then we had to pull that report, even though this is a national security issue.
Well, I mean, it's
ridiculous.
exactly. I mean, it's stunning to me because after Newtown, if that didn't get any change, it's hard to imagine what will. But I think ultimately what will be just perseverance. I mean, there you can look around whether it's not. These are not obviously the same issues, but I mean, if you look to how quickly, in some respects, I mean, in some other respects not, but 8 years ago, the idea that we would have marriage equality across the country was very far-fetched, at least in my mind. 3 years ago, the idea that we would get $15 an hour for fast food workers in New York State. I mean, when those folks started striking starting in New York City and across the country, people thought that it was going to be a much longer haul, and so. One never knows, and one has to keep up persevere. And
it's not just never knows. I will say very clearly, someone that kind of at the heart, in terms of knowing people in this movement there's massive change going on. Again, even background checks passed by the number of state legislatures and overwhelmingly on ballot measures would have been unthinkable a half dozen years ago. Nevada, which was a Western, gun state, we've got a measure on the ballot. The NRA is trying to do everything they can to block it, to undermine it, because they're going to lose the way they lost in Washington State. There may be one on the ballot there's a few other states I know people are looking at, Arizona, Maine, a few others. There may be ballot measures we've won a number of federal votes, like what I was talking about before, blocked some of their worst things. I mean, in very crazy gun states where they're trying to put guns on campus, which I know should be a no-brainer, but we're talking about people with no brains. And we've blocked them in almost every state. So, in businesses banning guns on their premises, there's a lot going in the positive direction. There's a huge grassroots organization now with Moms Demand Action, every single member of whom is a one-issue voter, just like they have on the other side. So it's not to say there isn't massive change. Of course, the problem is with this thing is that while that change is going on, people die because of the changes we don't have. I mean, and you hear about it, right? While the $15 minimum wage doesn't happen, there still are terrible things going on, too. There's people being underpaid and exploited, but that's not reported necessarily every day in the same fantastic way. You know what I mean? So that's the thing, is that cultural change that led to that $15 minimum wage, that led to gay marriage, that's now led to criminal justice sentences being looked at and us trying to sort of move a little bit away from the war on drugs and legalization of marijuana, or certainly medicinal marijuana, things like that were all unthinkable. I mean, the same thing's happening on guns. The problem is, I think it's hard to realize it sometimes because something like this happens, and many of something like this happen. But it could be because there's so many guns out there. But it will. I have absolutely no doubt with demographics, with the fact that sadly, look, I've got a number of friends now who are shooting victims or have lost family members. I mean, obviously, I'm very involved in this, so I'm somebody much more likely to. But the way it got to a point where everybody knew somebody who was gay, and it was sort of hard to say, "Oh, don't believe in gay rights," just because of some silly reason. It'll get there with this because this isn't stopping. We've tripled the number of mass shootings since 2011. That's only going to keep happening. I mean, this stuff, as more technology, this is one area where technology isn't necessarily our friend. As more technologies out there, worse and worse weaponry is going to get out there. And if we don't do anything about it, more and more people are going to be killed. I mean, that's just a fact. I don't know if you saw where some kid sent up a handgun and a drone the other day.
Yeah, I did.
He did. Well, next maybe that's an assault weapon. Next maybe that's, who knows what that is? Who knows how many people die? I mean, there will be a point here where it will just become undeniable that we're an incredibly unsafe society. Maybe people from Europe will stop coming here. Maybe people from states with better laws will stop going to the ones with the crazy laws. But it's going to happen because this is going to get outrageous. It's just going to keep getting worse. So I think the laws will hopefully continue to improve, and all I can hope for is that we don't lose as many as we could lose.